Hello everybody and welcome to the Import Export Hub channel. Bogdan here, your host for the next couple of minutes. And guys, I'll cut to the chase here and I will dive into today's topic, which covers the imports and the exports of Brazil for 2021, so relatively fresh data, which personally I think it's an excellent market, if you ask me, with the largest GDP and consumer market in South America. It's a diversified economy, we have lots of industries there, somehow dependent on agri-exports, and as we'll see together has very close ties with China in terms of both imports and exports. Brazil also it's quite challenging, if you want, in terms of bureaucracy or I don't know, ease of doing business. And my guess is that if you want to export towards Brazil as a small or I don't know, medium exporter, you should partner with a local business. But anyways, even though Brazil has many challenges and is a challenging market, there is a huge potential for success. Of course, if you, I don't know, invest the necessary resources in order to somehow better understand and overcome the challenges of doing business in this resource-rich and dynamic country, which, by the way, is member of Mercosur and one of the BRICS countries. So without further ado, let's dive into the numbers here. And as usual, I've prepared an Excel file that I've processed for you, and I will start with the general exports and imports, then cover the top performers for each flow in order to see who are the main trading partners. And as usual, where possible, I'll try to give you a couple of examples in order to see what really drives those commercial exchanges between Brazil and its trading partners. So in terms of exports for 2021, Brazil's exports seem to have hit a new record, as we have here almost $281 billion worth of exports, which is 34% more than the previous year, with chapters 26, 12, and 27 as the main drivers, which account for roughly 45% of Brazil's total exports. So quite concentrated, if you ask me. But then again, that's the case with rich resource countries. Other top performers in this top 10 list are chapters 2, so meat and edible meat. Chapter 84, again, is doing well with machinery and mechanical appliances. Or chapter 47 here, the 10th largest driver with pulp of wood, as Brazil is known as a really big wood pulp exporter. Sadly, as I can see here in this top 10 list, except chapters 84 and 87, which are chapters in which Brazil can add value, the rest of the chapters are low numbered chapters, meaning that the input of added value done in Brazil is relatively low. A path that Brazil will soon need to detach itself and, I don't know, grow even more the local industries in order to add more value locally. Anyhow, in terms of year-on-year changes, as I've said previously, the exports were up 34% with big relative changes above 50% in the three chapters highlighted here in yellow. And we have ores, slag, and ash was up almost 70%. Mineral fuel sector was up 54%, and the last one with 64.5% increase, the iron and steel sector, so chapter 72. And it makes sense really, as the industry gradually opened up in Brazil after 1 year of uncertainty and the pandemic. And of course, they needed the inputs in order to make the goods which are to be delivered both locally and on the foreign markets. So guys, these were the exports for 2021, and now I will move to the import flow, which also grew significantly if we compare with the figures for 2020. In fact, the figures for 2021 are well above the previous 4 years average, again meaning that also the local industries in Brazil felt confident enough and started to order inputs as well. And in terms of imports, as in the case with all major manufacturers, not sitting on a massive resource of oils, mineral fuels, and oils is usually the first ingredient here to restart the industrial activity, and we see how chapter 27 is on par with chapter 84, which comes second in terms of imports. We have also fertilizers needed for the vast agricultural land in Brazil with some $15 billion worth of imports. We have some organic chemicals. And on the 10th spot, we have chapter 90 with almost 3% in Brazil total imports. And now I will move on to the balance of trade here, which for 2021 was positive, driven mostly by the commodities huge volumes. And in fact, besides chapter 27 here, who is the only one in this top 10 list with positive balance of trade, with the rest of them, we have big negative balance of trade ranging from, I don't know, 5.3 to almost $24 billion, as in the case here with the chapter 85. And now, guys, with both the general exports and imports being covered, I'll move on to the top 5 performers for each flow, and I will start with the export flow jewels. So chapter 26, ores, slag, and ash, and here we have close to 69% increase year on year in relative terms, bringing the total exported value to some $48.7 billion, with China, Malaysia, and Japan as the main trading partners. But of course, there are other big players buying from Brazil in this top 10 list, like either Bahrain, Oman, South Korea, or the Netherlands, just to name a few. In terms of year-on-year changes, we have positive changes with these top 10 trading partners. The biggest change in absolute terms coming from China, who imported with some $10.3 billion more than it did in the previous year, which again makes sense really, as they are stocking as much as they can in order to feed China's huge manufacturing base. As for the main drivers, here there is no much there is not too much product complexity, and we have for both China and the Netherlands heading 2601 driving most of the exports, so iron ores and concentrates, including roasted pyrites. Hopefully I've pronounced it correctly. Now, guys, moving on to the second best export performer, which is chapter 12. Again, not a very complex chapter in terms of product diversity. And here we have almost 35% increase for 2021 with, again, China, Spain, and Thailand as the main trading partners. And we have other important ones like, I don't know, Mexico, Vietnam, or Turkey, again, just to mention a couple of them. And relative to the year-on-year changes, we have some good performances, again, in relation with China, who had the biggest absolute change of about $6.3 billion. But also Spain or Thailand here had good figures, both in absolute and relative terms. As for the main drivers, soybeans, whether or not broken, drives Brazil's exports both towards Spain and Vietnam. And with this chapter being covered, guys, I will now move on to the third best performer, chapter 27, with mineral fuels and oils. And for the third consecutive time, I see again China as the main destination. I told you previously that Brazil has very close ties with China, both in terms of imports and exports. And we see here some $14.3 billion, which is what, a little bit more than a third of Brazil exports from this chapter. So quite concentrated. On the second spot, we have Singapore with close to $4.9 billion, and on the third spot we have the United States with some $4 billion. And we have, of course, other important trading partners, and I will name a few. We have, I don't know, India, Portugal, or Malaysia. And Again, we see how the year-on-year changes were positive, ranging from $43 million, as in the case with Spain, to, I don't know, $2.9 billion, as in the case with China, which seems to be a very, very important buyer and trading partner for Brazil. I've told you earlier, and I repeat it again. And in absolute values, the exports towards Singapore, the United States, and Chile are also well above the 1 billion mark. So quite big moves last year in terms of liquid bulk shipping in Brazil. But anyhow, in terms of main drivers, for Singapore we have heading 2710, and for India we have heading 2709. So petroleum oils and oils obtained from bituminous minerals, crude. And with this being said, I'll now jump on to the fourth biggest export driver for Brazil. So chapter 2, meat, and here we have some $18.2 billion worth of exports for 2021, which is 15% more in relative terms than the figures from the previous year, with China, Hong Kong, and the United Arab Emirates as the main destinations for Brazil exports. But of course, that there are other important partners in this top 10 list, like, I don't know, Chile, Japan, or Singapore, again, just to name a few. And guys, relative to the year-on-year changes, the exports were up 15%, even though those towards China, Hong Kong, and Saudi Arabia shrunk. On the other hand, we see good performances in relation with the United States, United Arab Emirates, and Chile, who all had their imports increased quite a lot above the loss incurred with China and Hong Kong. Also, before mentioning the main export drivers here, it is worth seeing the trend followed by these particular exports, as we don't see big variations, no big volatility, as in the case with the previous three chapters. And it makes sense, as here we were talking about basic necessities, so food, which usually has constant demand, even though some seasonality is incurred. But anyways, moving to the main drivers from this chapter, for both the United Arab Emirates and Japan, we have heading 0207, so chicken, duck, geese, or turkey's meat. And hopefully there are not that many vegetarians watching this video, so sorry guys. I'm just the messenger here, and I think it's now time to move on and cover the last chapter for the export flow, which is chapter 72, so iron and steel. And well, here finally we have another number one trading partner for Brazil besides China, this time the United States with some $6.1 billion. Followed by China, and on the third spot we have Argentina with close to $1 billion worth of imports. And there are of course other important buyers here, like, I don't know, Mexico, Canada, Japan, or Belgium, but clearly the United States are dominating. And looking closer at the numbers, I see that in the last 5 years the United States are by far the biggest trading partner for Brazil for this particular chapter. And anyhow, in terms of year-on-year changes, the exports were up more than 64%, which translates roughly into $14.2 billion in absolute ones. And in this top 10 list, except here China, who imported with almost $818 million less, with the rest of them we have big positive changes, with the United States, Argentina, and Mexico having the largest increases, at least in absolute terms, which personally I think is the most relevant here. As for the main drivers, for the United States we have heading 7207, so semi-finished products of iron or non-alloy steel, and for Belgium we have heading 7202, so ferro alloys. And finally, guys, with the top 5 export drivers being covered, I will now switch to the imports flow, and I will start with the top performer, which is chapter 27, so mineral fuels and oils. so much needed to keep the industrial activity going. And we see how last year Brazil almost doubled its imports compared to the previous year, bringing the absolute value to some $30.4 billion, with the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Argentina as the main trading partners, followed by Paraguay, from which most probably is importing electrical energy. Then we have India, Bolivia, Russia, Colombia, Australia, and finally on the 10th spot we have here the United Arab Emirates with some $728 million. And in terms of year-on-year changes, except Paraguay, who exported less towards Brazil, with the rest of them we have big positive changes, both in absolute and relative terms, with the United States, the big winner, if you want, in terms of absolute change. And we have here almost $6.5 billion more exports for 2021. As for the main drivers, from Saudi Arabia, Brazil imports mostly crude petroleum oils, and from Australia, as expected, coal, so subheading 2701. Now, moving on with the import flow, the second most important driver for Brazil imports is Chapter 84, so machinery and mechanical appliances, with some $29.4 billion in 2021, which is almost 25% more than the previous year, with China again, the United States, and Germany as the top three trading partners. But of course, there are other important ones like, I don't know, Japan, Italy, the United Kingdom, or Argentina. And relative to the year-on-year changes, with almost all the top 10 partners, we have positive changes, except here Mexico, who exported with some $78 million less in 2021 than it did in the previous year. As for the biggest absolute positive change, China is here the winner, with some $2.6 billion more exports towards Brazil. And speaking of China, it seems that heading 8473 is driving most of the exports, while for Italy, compression ignition internal combustion piston engines drive most of the exports towards Brazil. And with this being said, guys, I will now move on to the third most important import driver, which is electrical machinery and equipment, including parts. And we see that these two bounce back rather strong from the 2020 downturn, with close to 28% more imports in relative terms, bringing the total value of the imports from this chapter to some $27.6 billion. And we see here some Asian and South Asian countries as the main trading partners, but there are other important ones like, I don't know, the United States, Germany, Mexico, or Italy. And except Germany here, which exported with almost 15% less in 2021, with the rest of them we have positive changes, with China again as the top performer, with some $3.8 billion more exports for 2021. And in terms of the main import drivers, from South Korea, the main one is heading 8542, so integrated circuits, and from Mexico, the main driver is coming from heading 8527, so reception apparatus for radio broadcasting. And guys, slowly but surely I'm approaching the end of this video. Still two more chapters to cover, and I have the fourth one, which is fertilizers, so chapter 31. Again, a much needed input for Brazil's important agri sector, and as you can see here, up until 2020 it was rather stable, as it should be. And then we see how in 2021 Brazil importers almost doubled their values compared with 2020. Maybe in the light of more favorable prices, or I don't know, higher uncertainties because of the pandemic and the business environment, I don't know. But anyhow, The absolute imported value is close to $15 billion, with traditional fertilizer exporters like the Russian Federation, China, Morocco, or Canada as the main trading partners, but there are others like Belarus, the United States, or Algeria, just to name a few from this top 10 list. And in terms of the main drivers, from the Russian Federation we have mineral or chemical potassic fertilizers, and from Algeria the main driver is heading 3102, so mineral or chemical nitrogenous fertilizers, which are critical to plant growth and reproduction. And guys, last but not least, the fifth most important chapter driving Brazil imports is chapter 87, so vehicles. And here we have almost 50% more imports in 2021 compared with the figures from 2020, bringing the absolute value close to $14.5 billion, with Argentina, China, and Germany as the main trading partners. But of course, as you can see, there are other important ones in this top 10 list, like, I don't know, Mexico, Japan, the United States, Italy, Sweden, or Thailand. And relative to the year-on-year changes, except South Korea, who had its exports towards Brazil shrink with 1.3%, with the rest of the remaining top 10 partners, we have positive changes, with the biggest absolute change, some $1.6 billion in relation with Argentina. And speaking of Argentina, the biggest import driver is heading 8704, so vehicles for the transport of goods, including here the chassis and engine and cab. And from Sweden, the home country of Volvo cars and trucks, we have heading 8708, so parts and accessories for trucks and cars, most probably, if you ask me, shipped towards Volvo's Curitiba plant in Brazil. Phew, and guys, with both the import and export flows being covered, my job here is done. Thank you all for watching. I really hope that you've enjoyed it. Don't forget to hit those tiny buttons below this video, and as usual, until next time, keep your business safe. Thanks.